Kamala Walker rolled her wheelchair through Clearwater High's hallways, 6 months into recovery from the car accident that had changed everything. As the new black girl in the predominantly white school, she'd expected stares, but not the cruel bullying that followed when Dean Riley and his friends cornered her in the parking lot. They yanked her from the chair and left her helpless on the asphalt while they rode around in circles, thinking there would be no consequences. But what Dean didn't know was that before her accident, Kamala had been a martial arts prodigy, trained by her father, a former Army combat instructor. And soon, the bullies would learn a very painful and costly lesson. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The wheelchair's rubber wheels squeaked against the polished linoleum as Kamala Walker navigated through the crowded hallway of Clearwater High School. 6 months ago, she would have been walking these halls on her own 2 feet, probably running late to first period like half the other students rushing past her now. 6 months ago, everything had been different. The car accident played in her mind sometimes when she least expected it. The screech of brakes, the moment of weightlessness, then nothing until she woke up in the hospital with her parents' worried faces hovering over her. The doctors had explained about her spinal injury with careful, clinical words that somehow made the reality easier and harder to accept at the same time. "Excuse me." "Sorry," she murmured as a group of students blocked her path, too absorbed in their conversation to notice her trying to get through. They shuffled aside with distracted apologies, and Kamala continued toward her locker, taking in the social landscape of her new school. Clearwater was different from her old school in Riverside. Bigger, whiter, with hallways that seemed designed to showcase the athletic trophies lining every available wall space. Students moved in clearly defined groups, the athletes with their Letterman jackets, the theater kids clustered around bulletin boards, the academic overachievers already buried in textbooks, despite it being only the 2nd week of school. "That's her," she heard someone say behind her, not quite quietly enough. "The new girl in the wheelchair." Kamala's hands tightened on her wheels, but she kept moving, pretending she hadn't heard. She'd gotten used to being noticed for all the wrong reasons since the accident, but it still stung. Think she was born like that or what? Probably a car accident or something. "My mom said her dad works security now at some office building." The voices belonged to 3 boys leaning against a row of lockers, and despite herself, Kamala glanced over. The tallest one had the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Broad shoulders, perfectly styled brown hair, and a smirk that suggested he found most things around him amusing. His Letterman jacket marked him as football, probably varsity, based on how the younger students gave him space. "Dean, come on, don't be a jerk," said one of his companions, though his tone suggested he didn't really mean it. "What? I'm just asking questions, Cole." "It's called being curious about our new classmate." Dean's voice carried that particular brand of fake innocence that Kamala recognized from years of martial arts training, the tone people used right before they tried to get away with something. She reached her locker and began working the combination, hyper-aware of their continued conversation. "Besides," Dean continued, his voice dropping just enough to seem conspiratorial while remaining perfectly audible, "I bet she gets all kinds of special treatment now. Probably gets extra time on tests, first pick of parking spots, teachers going easy on her because they feel sorry for her." "Dude, that's messed up," the 3rd boy said. But he was laughing. "What's messed up, Troy? I'm just saying if I had to be in a wheelchair, I'd totally milk it for everything it was worth. Get out of gym class, skip assemblies because of accessibility issues, maybe even get into college easier because of diversity quotas. Kamala's jaw clenched as she pulled her chemistry textbook from her locker. These were the kinds of comments that made her want to stand up and walk over there to show them exactly what she thought of their assumptions. But she couldn't stand up, and that was the whole point of their casual cruelty. "I heard her family moved here because her dad lost his job," Cole added. "Like maybe he was drunk driving when they crashed or something." "That was it." Kamala spun her chair around to face them, her dark eyes flashing with controlled anger. "My father has never had a drink in his life," she said clearly, her voice cutting through their conversation. "And I can hear everything you're saying." The three boys looked genuinely surprised that she'd spoken up. Dean recovered first, that smirk spreading wider across his face. "Hey, sorry about that. We didn't mean anything by it. Just, trying to figure out the new dynamics around here." He spread his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to look apologetic, but came across as condescending. "I'm Dean, by the way. This is Troy and Cole. Welcome to Clearwater." "Thanks," Kamala said flatly, not offering her name in return. "So, what happened?" Troy asked with the blunt curiosity of someone who'd never learned that some questions shouldn't be asked. "I mean, if you don't mind sharing." Kamala stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. She could tell them it was none of their business. She could ignore them entirely. Or she could give them just enough truth to shut them up. "Car accident," she said simply. 6 months ago." That sucks," Cole offered, though his tone suggested he was already losing interest. "Yeah," Dean agreed. But something in his expression had shifted, like he was filing this information away for later use. "Well, if you need anything, just let us know. We're always happy to help out." The bell rang, signaling the start of first period, and the hallway began to empty. Kamala watched the three boys saunter toward the main staircase, their body language radiating the kind of casual confidence that came from never having to worry about accessibility or acceptance. She had a feeling she'd be seeing more of them. 3 weeks into the semester, Kamala had established a routine that worked around Clearwater's limitations. She arrived early to avoid the rush, took the long way to classes that had ramp access, and had memorized which bathrooms were actually wheelchair accessible versus the ones that technically met requirements but were practically useless. "I still can't believe they put the accessible bathroom on the 3rd floor when all your classes are on the first 2 floors, Zara Mitchell said, walking beside Kamala's wheelchair as they headed to lunch. Zara had transferred from California the same week as Kamala, and their shared outsider status had quickly developed into genuine friendship. "It's fine," Kamala replied, though they both knew it wasn't. "I've gotten good at planning ahead." "That's not the point. You shouldn't have to plan your entire day around basic human needs, because this place was designed by people who never considered that disabled students might want to attend." Kamala appreciated Zara's anger on her behalf, but she'd learned to pick her battles. Some things were worth fighting for, and others were just the reality of navigating a world that hadn't been built with her in mind. They were passing the main staircase when Dean's voice carried down from the 2nd-floor landing. "Heads up, incoming wheelchair traffic. Make sure you're not blocking the ramp." Kamala looked up to see Dean, Troy, and Cole descending the stairs. Dean's comment had been loud enough for half the hallway to hear, delivered with that same fake, helpful tone he'd used during their first encounter. "Thanks for the public service announcement," Zara called back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just looking out for everyone's safety," Dean replied as they reached the bottom of the stairs. "Don't want any accidents." The word accidents hung in the air with deliberate weight. Troy snickered and Cole looked uncomfortable but said nothing. "You know what?" Zara started, taking a step toward them. But Kamala reached out and touched her arm. "It's not worth it," Kamala said quietly. "Actually, I think your friend here has the right idea, Dean said, moving to block their path to the cafeteria. Standing up for what's right and all that? Very admirable. Move, Kamala said simply. Of course. Of course. Wouldn't want to be accused of discrimination or anything. Dean stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, but Troy positioned himself directly in front of Kamala's wheelchair. Oops, sorry, didn't see you there, Troy said with mock innocence as Kamala had to stop short. Probably should get one of those little flags they put on bicycles, Cole added, finally joining in. You know, for visibility. Kamala felt the familiar burn of controlled rage building in her chest. These weren't random acts of thoughtlessness. They were calculated moves designed to humiliate her while maintaining plausible deniability. If she complained, they could claim it was all just misunderstandings. Troy, move, Zara said, her voice sharp with warning. What? I'm just standing here. Troy spread his arms innocently. It's a free country. I can stand wherever I want. Not if you're deliberately blocking someone's path, Kamala said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. Deliberately? That's a pretty serious accusation. You got any proof of that? The question was rhetorical, and they all knew it. In the absence of witnesses willing to speak up, or adults paying attention, it was her word against theirs. And in the social hierarchy of Clearwater High, her word didn't carry much weight. Troy finally stepped aside, but not before drawing out the moment long enough to make his point. As they continued toward the cafeteria, Kamala could hear the three boys laughing behind them. This is getting ridiculous, Zara said once they were out of earshot. You need to report them. For what? Standing in a hallway. For harassment. For creating a hostile environment. For being absolute jerks. Kamala maneuvered through the cafeteria entrance, scanning for an accessible table. And say what? That they're mean to me? That they make comments that hurt my feelings? That they're systematically targeting you because of your disability? Prove it. Zara fell silent because they both knew the truth. The boys were careful, always towing the line between outright bullying and behavior that could be explained away as teenage thoughtlessness. It was sophisticated cruelty, the kind that left no visible bruises and few witnesses willing to testify. That afternoon, Kamala sat in her family's converted garage, working through range-of-motion exercises with her mother. Nora Walker had transformed the space into a professional-grade physical therapy setup, complete with parallel bars, resistance bands, and floor mats. Your flexibility is improving, Nora observed as Kamala worked through a series of stretches designed to maintain muscle tone and prevent contractures. How are you feeling about the standing exercises? Better? Stronger? Kamala gritted her teeth as she pushed through a particularly challenging movement. I want to increase the frequency. Kamala, we've talked about this. Recovery isn't a race. Pushing too hard too fast can actually set you back. I'm not pushing too hard. I'm pushing as hard as I need to. Nora studied her daughter's expression, recognizing the stubborn determination that had gotten Kamala through months of grueling rehabilitation. Is something happening at school? Kamala hesitated. Her parents had enough to worry about without adding teenage drama to their list of concerns. Just the usual stuff. New school, new people. The usual stuff doesn't usually make you want to triple your physical therapy sessions. Before Kamala could respond, the garage door opened and Mark Walker entered, still wearing his security uniform from work. He assessed the scene with the trained eye of someone who'd spent years reading body language and tension levels. "How's our patient today?" he asked, but his tone suggested he'd already picked up on the undercurrents of frustration in the room. "Determined," Nora replied. "Maybe too determined." Mark knelt beside Kamala's mat, his presence immediately grounding. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" Kamala looked between her parents, her mother's concerned professionalism, her father's patient strength, and felt the weight of their love and protection. They'd already sacrificed so much for her recovery, relocating to a new city, adjusting their careers, restructuring their entire lives around her needs. "Just some kids at school," she said finally. "Nothing I can't handle." Mark nodded slowly. "You know, handling something doesn't always mean handling it alone. I know, but some fights are mine to fight. And some fights are worth fighting smart instead of hard." Kamala met her father's eyes, understanding passing between them. Mark had taught her that strength came in many forms, and sometimes the strongest thing you could do was wait for the right moment to act. "Can we work on the standing exercises?" she asked. Mark smiled. "Let's see what you've got." By November, the harassment had escalated from inconvenient encounters to deliberate targeting. Dean's group had developed a routine of accidentally blocking accessible pathways, making loud comments about disability benefits within earshot, and timing their movements to create maximum inconvenience for Kamala's daily navigation. The breaking point came on a gray Tuesday afternoon, as Kamala and Zara made their way to the student parking lot after school. Kamala had been looking forward to getting home. Her physical therapy session that morning had gone particularly well, and she was eager to continue working with her father on the strengthening exercises that were slowly rebuilding her core stability. "I swear if Mr. Peterson assigns another group project, I'm going to lose it," Zara was saying as they approached her car. "Like, I get that collaboration is important, but when half the class treats it as an excuse to do nothing while the other half does all the work—" "Zara," Kamala interrupted, her voice tense. She'd spotted Dean, Troy, and Cole lounging against a nearby pickup truck, watching their approach with the predatory interest of cats spotting a wounded bird. Zara followed her gaze and immediately understood. "Maybe we should go back inside, wait for them to leave." "Number," Kamala's jaw set with determination. "I'm not hiding from them anymore." They continued toward the car, but as Kamala began transferring from her wheelchair to the passenger seat, a process that required her to slide from the chair onto the car seat while Zara folded the wheelchair, Dean's voice cut across the parking lot. "Hey, look at that. Daily gymnastics show." Troy laughed. "Better than cable television." Kamala tried to ignore them, focusing on the transfer process, but their commentary continued. "Wonder if she gets extra credit for degree of difficulty," Cole added, his confidence growing with his friend's approval. "Shut up!" Zara snapped, positioning herself between Kamala and the boys while still helping with the wheelchair. "Whoa, hostile much?" Dean said, pushing off from the truck. "We're just appreciating the performance." "Zani." That's when Kamala realized they weren't just talking anymore. They were walking over, all three of them moving with the casual swagger of people who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. "You know what?" Dean said, arriving at the car just as Zara was folding Kamala's wheelchair. "I've always wondered what it's like to ride in one of those things." "Don't even think about it," Zara warned. But Dean was already reaching for the wheelchair handles. "Come on, just for a second. I bet it's like a really slow go-kart." "Get your hands off my chair," Kamala said from the passenger seat, her voice deadly quiet. "Relax. I'm not going to break it. Just want to see how it works." Dean pulled the wheelchair away from the car despite Zara's attempts to stop him. Troy and Cole moved to block Zara from interfering as Dean settled into Kamala's wheelchair. "Oh wow, this is actually pretty comfortable. No wonder you're in no hurry to get out of it." "Okay, you need to stop," Kamala said, her hands clenched into fists. From her position in the car, she was completely helpless to intervene physically. "Stop what?" I'm just testing out the equipment, making sure it's safe for public use. Dean began wheeling around the parking lot in wide circles, Troy and Cole jogging alongside him like an entourage. "This is actually pretty fun," Dean called out. "Troy, you've got to try this." "Dean, give it back," Zara demanded. But Troy stepped in front of her. "He's just having a little fun. Don't be such a buzzkill." The scene was attracting attention from other students loading into their cars, but instead of intervening, they pulled out their phones to record. Some were laughing, treating it like entertainment. Others looked uncomfortable but made no move to help. Kamala watched in helpless rage as Dean performed wheelies in her chair, whooping with delight each time he managed to lift the front wheels off the ground. The sight of him treating her mobility device like a toy while she sat trapped in the car, unable to do anything about it, was more humiliating than any of their previous harassment. "Look, I'm doing tricks," Dean announced, attempting to spin the wheelchair in a tight circle. The chair tilted dangerously, nearly toppling before he caught his balance. "You're going to break it!" Kamala shouted, her composure finally cracking. "What? This thing's built like a tank. Probably costs more than my car, right? Insurance must be paying for all kinds of fancy upgrades." Troy had taken his turn in the chair and was now racing Cole in circles around the parking lot. The sound of their laughter, mixed with the squeal of rubber wheels on asphalt, created a soundtrack of pure humiliation. "Please," Kamala said, hating the word as soon as it left her mouth, but desperate to get her chair back. "I need it to get around." "Of course you do," Dean said, finally climbing out of the wheelchair. But instead of returning it, he left it sitting 20 feet away from the car. "There you go. Good as new." "Bring it here," Zara demanded. "What? You can't walk 20 feet? Oh, wait." Dean's smirk widened. "I guess you can't." They walked away laughing, leaving Kamala stranded in the passenger seat and Zara standing helplessly beside the car. Other students who had witnessed the entire scene quickly dispersed, clearly wanting to avoid any association with what had happened. Zara retrieved Kamala's wheelchair, her hands shaking with anger as she checked it for damage. "Those absolute jerks! We're reporting this right now." "To who?" Kamala asked bitterly. "The administration that's been ignoring everything else they've done?" "To someone. Anyone. This can't be legal." But as they drove home in silence, both girls knew the truth. Without adult witnesses or clear evidence of intent to harm, it would be treated as teenage horseplay gone too far. The boys would claim they were just having fun, never meaning any harm, sorry if feelings got hurt. That night, Kamala lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the parking lot incident, the laughter, the phones recording her humiliation, the casual cruelty disguised as entertainment. Something fundamental had shifted inside her. The careful patience she'd maintained, the strategic silence, the hope that things would improve on their own, all of it burned away by the image of Dean treating her wheelchair like an amusement park ride. She thought about her father's words about fighting smart instead of hard. Maybe it was time to do both. The next morning, Kamala sat across from Vice Principal Jameson in his cramped office, watching him shuffle through papers with the distracted air of someone who had already decided how this conversation would end. "So you're saying these boys took your wheelchair and rode around in it?" Jameson asked, not looking up from his notes. "Yes, for several minutes, while other students filmed it." And this happened in the parking lot after school hours?" "Technically after school, but still on school property." Jameson finally looked at her, his expression suggesting mild annoyance at having to deal with teenage drama. "Miss Walker, I understand that adjusting to a new school can be challenging, especially given your circumstances. But what you're describing sounds like typical teenage behavior that got a little out of hand. And doing typical teenage behavior. Kamala's voice remained steady, but her knuckles were white where they gripped her wheelchair armrests. Boys being boys, you know. I'm sure they didn't mean any real harm. Sometimes kids don't think about how their actions might affect others. They deliberately took my mobility device and used it as entertainment while I was unable to stop them. I understand you're upset, but without any adults witnessing this alleged incident, it becomes a matter of he said, she said. And frankly, taking someone's wheelchair for a few minutes hardly constitutes harassment. Kamala stared at him, processing the casual dismissal of what had been one of the most humiliating experiences of her life. What if they had taken someone's glasses and thrown them around, or grabbed someone's hearing aid? That's different. How? Jameson's uncomfortable silence stretched long enough to answer her question. Different because those things happen to normal students. And this had happened to the disabled girl, who should probably just be grateful she was allowed to attend Clearwater at all. I'll have a word with the boys, he said finally. Make sure they understand that pranks can sometimes go too far. A word? Yes. I think that should clear things up nicely. End of quote. Meanwhile, 3 hallways away, Dean leaned against his locker while Troy and Cole recounted the previous day's events to a growing crowd of listeners. You should have seen her face, Troy was saying, like she couldn't believe we were actually doing it. The best part was when Dean started doing wheelies, Cole added. I thought she was going to cry. Dean basked in the attention, but something nagged at him about the look in Kamala's eyes during the parking lot incident. Not the helpless anger he'd expected, but something colder, more calculating. Think she'll report us? Cole asked, a note of worry creeping into his voice. To who? Jameson? Dean scoffed. My dad plays golf with the superintendent. Besides, it's not like we actually hurt her or anything. We were just messing around. Still, maybe we should cool it for a while, Troy suggested. Cool it. We're just getting started. You see how easy it is to get under her skin? Besides, what's she going to do about it? Chase us down? The group laughed, but Dean noticed a few students on the edge of the crowd looking uncomfortable. Good. Let them squirm. It reminded everyone where the power really lay in this school. That afternoon, Kamala arrived home to find both her parents waiting in the living room, their expressions grim. How did the meeting with the vice principal go? Nora asked. About as well as expected. How? Kamala transferred from her wheelchair to the couch, noting how her parents exchanged a look that contained entire conversations. What did he say? Mark asked. That boys will be boys. That it was just teenage behavior that got out of hand. That he'd have a word with them. A word? Nora repeated, her voice flat with disbelief. That's it? Kamala nodded, watching her father's jaw clench with controlled anger. Mark Walker had spent his military career protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, and the concept of authorities failing in that duty was physically painful for him to accept. This is unacceptable, he said finally. We're going over Jameson's head. To who? He made it clear that without adult witnesses, it's my word against theirs. And their word apparently carries more weight. Then we document everything, Nora said, slipping into problem-solving mode. Every incident, every interaction. We build a pattern that can't be dismissed. Mom, they're not stupid. They know exactly how far they can push without crossing any official lines. Then maybe it's time to consider other options, Mark said quietly. Like what? Transferring again? Running away every time someone makes my life difficult? Like fighting back. The words hung in the air between them. Nora shot her husband a warning look, but Mark continued. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about refusing to be a victim, about making them understand that actions have consequences even when the system fails to enforce them. Mark, Nora warned. What? She has every right to defend herself. We've been training her to regain her strength. Maybe it's time she remembered what that strength is for. Kamala looked between her parents, seeing the fundamental divide in their approaches. Her mother wanted to work within the system, to document and report, and hope that eventually justice would prevail. Her father understood that sometimes the system was the problem and justice had to be taken rather than given. I need to think, Kamala said finally. That night, she lay in bed, hearing the vice principal's dismissive tone, the boys' laughter echoing in the parking lot, the phones recording her humiliation for social media entertainment. But mixed with the anger was something else, a cold, focused determination that reminded her of the mindset she'd cultivated during years of martial arts training. Her father was right about one thing. She'd been thinking like a victim, hoping for rescue that wasn't coming. Maybe it was time to start thinking like a fighter again. The change in Kamala's training regimen was subtle but significant. Where before, she had approached her physical therapy with determined hope, now she attacked each exercise with focused intensity that bordered on fierce. Easy, Nora cautioned as Kamala pushed through her third set of core-strengthening exercises that morning. Your muscles need time to rebuild. You can't force progress. No, I'm not forcing anything, Kamala replied through gritted teeth, maintaining her plank position despite the tremor in her arms. I'm just done accepting limitations. Mark watched from the doorway, recognizing the shift in his daughter's mindset. It was the same transformation he'd witnessed in soldiers who'd stopped hoping for rescue and started planning their own escape. Show me the standing progression again, Kamala said after completing her floor work. Kamala, we just did that yesterday. My body needs to remember what it's capable of. Kamala transferred to the parallel bars, gripping the rails with white knuckles. How long can I maintain weight-bearing now? About 2 minutes, but that's significant progress from, I want to get to 5 minutes by Christmas. Nora and Mark exchanged glances. Christmas was 6 weeks away. That might be aggressive, Nora said carefully. Everything about this situation is aggressive. While Kamala pushed her physical limits at home, the boys at school were growing bolder in their assumption that they could act without consequence. Dean's talk with Vice Principal Jameson had lasted exactly 3 minutes and consisted mainly of Jameson explaining that pranks should be kept in good fun. Basically a free pass, Dean told Troy and Cole as they watched Kamala navigate the crowded hallway during the lunch period change. As long as we don't leave any marks, we're golden. They had developed a new game over the past 2 weeks, strategic positioning. One of them would plant themselves directly in Kamala's path at bottleneck points in the hallway, forcing her to ask them to move or find another route. When she asked politely, they'd comply with exaggerated courtesy. When she tried alternate routes, they'd follow and repeat the process. It's like herding sheep, Troy had observed with satisfaction. Today, Cole decided to escalate. As Kamala approached the cafeteria entrance, he positioned himself in the wheelchair-accessible doorway and pretended to be absorbed in his phone. "Excuse me," Kamala said. Cole looked up with feigned surprise. "Oh, sorry. Didn't see you there." He stepped aside, but only far enough that Kamala had to squeeze through the gap between him and the doorframe. As she passed, he mumbled just loud enough for her to hear. Maybe she'd get one of those backup beepers. Kamala stopped her wheelchair and turned to face him. "What did you say?" "Nothing. Just thinking out loud about traffic safety." The cafeteria fell unusually quiet as other students sensed confrontation brewing. Kamala studied Cole's face, noting the smug satisfaction barely concealed behind his innocent expression. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence. "I think you're a coward who only feels big when he's picking on someone he thinks can't fight back." Cole's face flushed red. "What did you call me?" "You heard me." Dean and Troy materialized at Cole's sides, the pack instinct kicking in at the first sign of their member being challenged. "Problem here?" Dean asked, though his tone suggested he was hoping for one. "No problem," Kamala replied calmly. "Just making an observation about people who mistake cruelty for courage." "Joe, careful," Troy said, stepping closer to her wheelchair. "You're starting to sound ungrateful for all the help we've been giving you around here." "Help?" Kamala's laugh was sharp with disbelief. "Is that what you call it?" "We've been nothing but accommodating," Dean said. "Making sure you have clear paths, looking out for your safety, even testing your equipment to make sure it's working properly." The cafeteria audience was growing, students drawn by the unusual sight of someone directly confronting the popular athletes. Some had phones out, ready to capture whatever happened next. "You're right," Kamala said, surprising everyone with her sudden agreement. "You have been very instructive. I've learned a lot from watching you." Something in her tone made Dean frown. "Yeah, like what?" "Like how much people will let you get away with when they think you're untouchable. Like how easy it is to mistake silence for weakness. Like how satisfying it must feel to punch down instead of up." "You threatening us?" Cole asked, his voice rising. "Threatening you?" Kamala tilted her head as if considering the possibility. "What could I possibly do to threaten you? I'm just a girl in a wheelchair, right?" The question hung in the air with more weight than its words should have carried. Dean felt an uncomfortable prickle of unease, though he couldn't pinpoint why. "That's right," he said finally. "So maybe remember that next time you want to run your mouth." Kamala smiled, and something about that smile made all three boys take an unconscious step backward. "I'll remember everything," she said softly. "Every word, every action, every consequence. Memory is funny that way. It has a habit of coming back when you least expect it." Once, she wheeled away toward an empty table, leaving the three boys standing in the doorway with the unsettling feeling that they'd just lost an exchange they should have won easily. "What was that about?" Troy muttered. Dean shook his head, but the unease lingered. For the first time since this had all started, he wondered if they might be underestimating exactly who they were dealing with. 3 days after the cafeteria confrontation, Miss Reynolds noticed the pattern during her 5th period English class. She'd been teaching for 12 years and had developed an eye for the subtle dynamics that adults often missed. The way certain students positioned themselves to intimidate others, the careful timing of disruptions, the psychological warfare that teenagers waged with surgical precision. Today, she watched Troy deliberately knock his textbook off his desk just as Kamala was wheeling past to turn in her assignment. The book landed squarely in her path, forcing her to stop and maneuver around it while Troy made a show of slowly retrieving it. "Sorry about that," Troy said with mock sincerity. "These things just have a mind of their own." Dean and Cole snickered from their seats nearby, and Miss Reynolds felt her jaw tighten. She'd witnessed similar incidents over the past month, always small, always plausibly accidental, always targeting the same student. After class, she approached Kamala as the other students filed out. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Kamala paused, weariness flickering across her features. "Is there a problem with my essay?" "No, your work is excellent as always. I wanted to ask if everything is going well for you here at Clearwater." The careful neutrality of Kamala's expression told Miss Reynolds everything she needed to know. "It's fine. Just the usual adjustment period. The usual adjustment period doesn't typically involve students deliberately creating obstacles in your path. Kamala's hands stilled on her wheelchair wheels. I'm sorry. I've been watching, Kamala. The book incidents, the strategic positioning, the comments just loud enough to hear. This isn't normal teenage behavior. For a moment, hope flickered in Kamala's eyes before being quickly suppressed. Even if that were true, what could you do about it? Miss Reynolds recognized the defeat in that question, the voice of someone who'd already tried official channels and found them wanting. I could document what I've observed, file a formal complaint. And then what? They get another talking to about keeping pranks in good fun? The bitterness in Kamala's voice confirmed Miss Reynolds' suspicions about how previous reports had been handled. Maybe, but at least there would be an adult witness on record. Kamala considered this, weighing the potential benefits against the almost certain escalation that would follow. What if it makes things worse? What if doing nothing makes things worse? Before Kamala could respond, the classroom door opened and Vice Principal Jameson appeared, his expression already conveying irritation. Miss Reynolds, I need to speak with you about the incident you talked to me about regarding some boys in your class. Miss Reynolds' stomach dropped. She hadn't submitted any report yet. She'd only been considering it. But her pause in responding gave Jameson the opening he needed. I think there might be some misunderstanding about normal student interactions, he continued, glancing meaningfully at Kamala. Sometimes what appears to be targeted behavior is really just teenage clumsiness. And teenage clumsiness that only affects one student? Miss Reynolds asked. Miss Walker, would you give us some privacy? Jameson's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Kamala left reluctantly, but not before catching Miss Reynolds's eye with a look that said she'd been through this before. As soon as the door closed, Jameson's demeanor shifted to barely controlled frustration. Megan, I need you to be very careful about the allegations you're considering. These are good kids from prominent families. Accusations of harassment could seriously damage their futures. What about Kamala's future? What about her right to attend school without being systematically tormented? Systematically tormented? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? We're talking about typical teenage social dynamics. I'm talking about deliberate, repeated targeting of a disabled student. Jameson's expression hardened. And I'm talking about 3 young men with bright futures who don't deserve to have their reputations destroyed by overreaction to normal adolescent behavior. Miss Reynolds felt the familiar weight of institutional pressure, the subtle message that her job security might depend on her willingness to look the other way. So, I should just ignore what I'm seeing? I'm suggesting you consider whether what you think you're seeing is actually what's happening. Sometimes our desire to protect can make us see problems where none exist. Later that evening, Kamala pushed herself harder than ever during her training session with her father. Her frustration powered each movement, each deliberate step in the parallel bars, a rejection of the helplessness that others seemed determined to impose on her. That's 10 minutes of weight-bearing, Mark observed. Your balance is improving too. It's not enough. Kamala's voice was tight with controlled anger. I need to be stronger, faster. This isn't just about physical strength anymore, is it? Kamala met her father's eyes in the mirror that lined one wall of their makeshift gym. A teacher tried to help me today, tried to document what's been happening. That's good news. Jameson shut her down before she could even file a report, told her she was overreacting, that the boys' futures were more important than protecting me. Mark was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. So the system isn't just failing you, it's actively protecting them. Looks that way. Then we stop depending on the system. Dad, don't even think about it, Kamala said without looking up. Think about whatever protective dad thing you're considering. I can see it on your face. Mark studied his daughter, seeing not just her determination, but her fragility beneath it. 6 months of rebuilding herself physically and emotionally, and these boys were systematically tearing it down. "Sometimes fathers have to step in," he said quietly. "Not this time, Dad. These boys need to understand that their actions have consequences, and since the school won't provide those consequences, you will." Kamala turned to face him, her expression mixing gratitude with frustration. "Dad, I love you for wanting to protect me, but this is something I have to handle myself." Why? Because you're trying to prove you're independent? Because if you fight my battles for me, I'll never learn to fight them myself. Nora joined them in the kitchen, sensing the tension. "What are we talking about?" "Mark is considering a direct approach to our problem," Kamala said. "A conversation," Mark clarified, "with the boys and their parents, making it clear that this harassment stops now." "And what happens after that conversation?" Nora asked, her therapist training kicking in. "When they realize Kamala tattled to her daddy?" "They'll escalate," Kamala said simply. "They'll make my life 10 times worse, and they'll be more careful to avoid adult witnesses." Mark felt the familiar frustration of a protector whose hands were tied. "So, I'm supposed to just watch them torment you? You're supposed to trust that you raised me to handle this. You're 17 years old. I'm 17 years old, and I've been through more than most adults. I survived a car accident that could have killed me. I've rebuilt my entire life from scratch. I think I can handle 3 insecure teenage boys." Despite her words, Mark could see the cost of this ongoing battle in the tension around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders. The boys weren't just harassing her, they were wearing her down day by day. That afternoon, while Kamala was in her last class, Mark found himself sitting in his truck in the Clearwater parking lot. He'd been planning to wait for Kamala as usual, but seeing Dean, Troy, and Cole walking toward their cars gave him an opportunity he couldn't ignore. He got out of the truck and approached them, his military bearing immediately commanding their attention. "You boys are Dean Riley, Troy Bennett, and Cole Watson," he said. It wasn't a question. The 3 boys exchanged glances, suddenly looking much younger and less confident. "Yes, sir," Dean replied cautiously. "I'm Mark Walker, Kamala's father." The color drained from Cole's face. Troy shifted uncomfortably. Dean tried to maintain his composure, but failed to hide the nervousness in his eyes. "I want to be very clear about something," Mark continued, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The harassment of my daughter stops now. Today. Permanently." "1. Sir, I think there might be some misunderstanding," Dean started. "No misunderstanding." Mark stepped closer, close enough that all 3 boys had to look up to meet his eyes. "I know exactly what you've been doing. The wheelchair incident, the comments, the deliberate obstruction in hallways, all of it." "We were just," Troy began. "You were just what? Having fun? Boys being boys?" Mark's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Let me explain something to you. My daughter is stronger than all 3 of you combined. She's rebuilding herself from a trauma that would have broken lesser people. And you think that makes her a target for your entertainment?" The boys stood frozen, suddenly understanding that this wasn't the kind of adult who could be charmed or manipulated. "Here's what's going to happen," Mark continued. "You're going to leave my daughter alone completely. No more pranks, no more comments, no more deliberate interference with her daily life. You're going to treat her with the respect she deserves." "And if we don't?" Dean asked, trying to salvage some defiance. Mark smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "Then you'll discover that Kamala inherited more than just my determination, and you really don't want to find out what that means." "Oh." That evening, Dean paced around his bedroom while Troy and Cole sat on his bed, all three of them still processing the parking lot encounter with Mark Walker. "Can you believe that guy?" Dean said, his initial shock giving way to indignation. "Coming at us like some kind of tough guy military wannabe." "He was pretty intense," Cole admitted, unconsciously rubbing his arms where goosebumps had formed during the confrontation. "So what? He's intense. Big deal. What's he actually going to do? Beat up 3 high school students?" Dean's voice grew louder with each word. "He'd be arrested before he made it off school property." Troy nodded slowly, his confidence returning. "Yeah, and my dad's a lawyer. One phone call and that guy would be facing assault charges just for threatening us." "Exactly." Dean stopped pacing and turned to face his friends. "He's all bark and no bite. Has to be. Adults can't just go around intimidating kids, no matter how tough they think they are." Cole shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, guys. Maybe we should just lay off for a while. I mean, what's the point of messing with her anymore anyway?" "The point," Dean said, his voice taking on an edge that made Cole flinch, "is that nobody threatens me. Not some security guard playing soldier, and definitely not his crippled daughter." "Dean," Troy started. "No, listen. You think I'm going to let them think they scared me? Let word get around school that Kamala Walker's daddy made Dean Riley back down? Not happening." He shook his head emphatically. Troy leaned forward, catching Dean's energy. "So, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to stop playing games. No more subtle stuff. No more careful pranks that can be explained away. I want to send a message that Daddy's little intimidation speech didn't work." Cole looked between his two friends, recognizing the dangerous gleam in Dean's eyes. "What kind of message?" "The kind that puts Princess in her place once and for all. Shows everyone at school who really runs things around here." Meanwhile, at the Walker house, Mark sat across from Kamala at the dinner table, the weight of his afternoon decision heavy between them. "You talked to them, didn't you?" Kamala said, not looking up from her plate. Mark sighed. "How did you know?" "Because Troy looked like he'd seen a ghost during chemistry class, and Cole wouldn't even make eye contact. Dean just stared at me with this weird expression I couldn't read. I had to do something, Kamala. Watching them torment you day after day. Dad, I asked you not to interfere, and I tried to respect that, but there's only so much a father can take." Nora set down her fork. "What exactly did you say to them?" "I made it clear that the harassment needed to stop, that there would be consequences if it continued." Kamala finally looked up, her expression mixing frustration with understanding. "Dad, you can't threaten teenagers. You know that, right?" "I didn't threaten anyone. I simply explained the situation." "How did they react?" Mark hesitated. "They seemed appropriately concerned, meaning they were scared in the moment, but are probably planning retaliation right now." The accuracy of her assessment hit Mark like a physical blow. In his desire to protect his daughter, he might have made things exponentially worse. Back in Dean's room, the planning session had taken on the intensity of a military briefing. Troy had pulled up the school's online calendar on his phone, scanning for opportunities. "Winter formal is next Friday," he said. "Everyone's going to be there." "Too public," Dean replied. "Too many adults around. We need something more private." "What about the parking lot again?" Cole suggested. "After school, when most people have left." "No, that's where her dad confronted us. Too obvious." Dean stopped pacing, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I've got a better idea." Troy and Cole waited, recognizing the look that usually preceded Dean's most elaborate schemes. "You know how she always stays late on Thursdays for that stupid debate club meeting?" "Yeah. So she's always one of the last people to leave. Usually just her and that friend of hers. What's her name?" "Zara. Parking lot's practically empty by then." Cole felt his stomach tighten. Dean, what are you thinking? I'm thinking it's time for Princess Wheels to learn what happens when Daddy can't protect her. When there's no one around to witness her humiliation. Dude, that sounds like justice, Dean interrupted. She thinks she's so tough, sitting there in her chair, giving us attitude. Her father thinks he can intimidate us into backing down. Time to show them both how wrong they are. Troy was nodding enthusiastically. Now, what did you have in mind? Something memorable. Something that'll be talked about for the rest of the school year. Something that makes it crystal clear who has the power around here. Nabaru. Cole looked between his two friends, recognizing that they'd crossed a line from casual cruelty into something much darker. Guys, I don't know about this. What if we get caught? We won't get caught, Dean said with absolute certainty. And even if we did, what are they going to do? Expel the star linebacker and two of his best friends? My dad donates more money to this school than half the other parents combined. Besides, Troy added, it'll be her word against ours, and we've already established how much weight her word carries around here. Dean smiled, the expression cold and calculating. Thursday can't come fast enough. Thursday afternoon arrived with deceptive normalcy. The debate club meeting had run long, leaving Kamala and Zara among the last students in the building as they made their way to the parking lot. Only a handful of cars remained scattered across the vast expanse of asphalt. Zara's Honda sat in its usual spot near the accessible parking area, while a few teacher vehicles clustered near the main entrance. That's when they saw them. Dean, Troy, and Cole emerged from behind a large SUV, moving with the calculated precision of predators who had been lying in wait. Their casual positioning blocked the most direct route to Zara's car, forcing Kamala to either confront them or take a long detour around the parking lot. Well, Dean said, his voice carrying a confidence that made Kamala's skin crawl. Look who's working late today. Just keep walking, Zara muttered, but her voice betrayed her nervousness. Actually, Troy said, stepping further into their path, we were hoping to have a little chat. Cole positioned himself to cut off their retreat toward the school building, completing the trap. Unlike their previous encounters, there was no pretense of accidental interaction this time. This was deliberate, planned, and isolated. Chat about what? Kamala asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. About respect, Dean replied. About boundaries. About what happens when people don't know their place. Zara had her phone out, finger hovering over her emergency contacts. We don't want any trouble. Too late for that, Troy said. Trouble already found us when Daddy decided to play tough guy in the parking lot. Dean stepped closer to Kamala's wheelchair. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get out of that chair right now, so we can have some fun with it again. Number? The simple word hung in the air with unexpected force. Dean blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. I said no. I don't think you understand the situation here, Troy said, moving closer. You don't get to say no. Get out of the chair, Dean demanded, reaching for her arm. Now, don't touch me, Kamala warned, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. But Dean was beyond listening. Months of unchecked aggression and his father's confrontation had built to this moment. He grabbed Kamala's arm and yanked hard, pulling her forward out of the wheelchair. The force of it sent Kamala tumbling to the asphalt, her body hitting the ground with a sickening impact that echoed across the empty parking lot. Pain shot through her shoulder and hip where she struck the pavement, and for a moment she lay still, stunned by the violence of it. There we go, Dean said with satisfaction, settling into her wheelchair. Much better, Zara screamed. You can't do that to her! And started forward, but Cole grabbed her arm. "Stay back and watch," he told her. "Maybe you'll learn something." Troy was already pulling out his phone. "This is going to be epic. Princess on the ground where she belongs." Dean began wheeling around in circles, laughing as he performed the same wheelies and tricks they'd done months ago. But this time was different. This time, Kamala was lying helpless on the cold asphalt, watching her mobility device being treated like a toy while she was powerless to stop it. "Look at her," Troy called out, pointing his phone camera at Kamala. "Not so tough now, are you?" "Please," Zara pleaded, tears in her eyes. "She needs that chair. She needs to learn her place," Dean replied, executing another wheelie. "Both of you do." "Bon." Kamala lay on the ground, feeling the cold asphalt against her cheek, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her tongue during the fall. The humiliation washed over her, but underneath it something else was building. Not helplessness, not despair. Rage, pure, focused, controlled rage that burned away every other emotion. Slowly, deliberately, Kamala placed her palms flat against the asphalt. The boys were too busy with their performance to notice as she pressed down, engaging her core muscles the way her father had taught her. She pushed herself up to a sitting position, the adrenaline coursing through her body, making her feel invincible. Troy noticed first, his laughter dying in his throat. Dean, what?" Dean called back, still riding the wheelchair. "Look." Dean turned to see Kamala slowly, carefully rising to her feet. The movement was deliberate, controlled, her balance steady despite the pain in her shoulder. She stood up fully, brushing dirt from her hands, her dark eyes fixed on Dean with an intensity that made him stop wheeling. The parking lot fell completely silent. "What the hell?" Cole whispered. "You've been faking it," Dean accused, his voice cracking. "This whole time, you've been lying." Kamala took one step forward, then another. Her movements were careful, but unmistakably real. "I haven't been faking anything," she said quietly. "I've been recovering." "Give me my chair back," she continued, her voice carrying a new authority that none of them had heard before. "Now," Dean's face twisted with rage, "you don't deserve it. You've been playing victim when you could walk all along." "Last chance," Kamala said, taking another step forward. "Give it back or face the consequences." Dean laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Consequences from you?" He jumped out of the wheelchair and shoved it away, sending it rolling across the parking lot. "Let's see how tough you are when we put you back on the ground." The three boys began to advance, and Kamala realized her moment of truth had finally arrived. The three boys formed a loose semicircle around her, their initial shock giving way to calculating aggression. Dean flexed his hands. Troy cracked his knuckles, and Cole shifted his weight like a boxer, preparing for a fight. "You think standing up makes you some kind of tough guy?" Dean sneered, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. "You're still just a crippled girl who's been lying to everyone." Kamala said nothing, her breathing steady as she assessed the situation. Three opponents, all larger than her, all convinced of their physical superiority. The parking lot stretched empty around them. No witnesses except Zara, who stood frozen with her phone clutched in trembling hands. "Dean, maybe we should just—" Cole started, but Dean cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Number. She embarrassed us in front of the whole school with her fake victim act. Time she learned what real consequences look like." Troy moved first, lunging forward to grab Kamala's arm. But something unexpected happened. Instead of backing away or trying to escape, Kamala shifted her weight and pivoted, using Troy's momentum against him. He stumbled past her, off balance and confused. "What the—" Troy spun around, face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "She got lucky, that's all." But Kamala's stance had changed. Her feet were planted shoulder-width apart, her center of gravity low, her hands raised in a defensive position that spoke of years of training. She looked less like a victim and more like someone who understood exactly what was about to happen. "Last warning," she said, her voice calm despite the tension crackling through the air. "Walk away now, and this ends here." Dean laughed, but the sound was forced. "Walk away from you? I don't think so." He nodded to Cole, who moved to flank Kamala from the left, while Troy repositioned himself on the right. Classic pack tactics. Surround the target, overwhelm with numbers, rely on intimidation and superior size. Zara found her voice at last. "Stop it, all of you, just stop. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Dean said, without taking his eyes off Kamala. "By the time they get here, this will all be over, and it'll be our word against yours," Troy added. 3 honor students versus a girl who's been faking a disability for months. Cole hesitated, something in Kamala's posture triggering an instinct that told him this wasn't going to go the way they'd planned. "Guys, I really think we should." "You think too much," Dean snapped. "Just grab her." But as Cole moved forward, Kamala did something none of them expected. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, or a nervous one, or even a defiant one. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting for this moment, who had been preparing for it through months of pain and frustration and carefully controlled rage. "My father always told me," she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather, "that the biggest mistake bullies make is assuming their victims will stay victims forever." Dean felt a chill run down his spine, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. Not in front of his friends, not after everything they'd invested in breaking this girl. "Your father's not here to protect you now," he said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "I don't need him to protect me," Kamala replied. "He already taught me everything I need to know." Troy made the mistake of interpreting her words as empty bravado. He rushed forward again, this time committing fully to tackling her to the ground. But Kamala was ready. She stepped aside at the last second, her movement economical and precise, then swept Troy's legs as he passed. He hit the asphalt hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs in a painful gasp. Cole froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. "How did she—" "Shut up and help me," Dean commanded, but his voice cracked slightly. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be in control, supposed to be the ones teaching lessons. Zara, meanwhile, had overcome her initial paralysis and was frantically working her phone. But instead of calling the police, she was recording, her hands steadying as she realized what she was witnessing. Dean and Cole approached more cautiously now, having seen what happened to Troy, who was still on the ground clutching his ribs and struggling to breathe. 2 against 1, Dean said, trying to convince himself as much as Kamala. "Even if you know some karate moves, you can't take both of us." Kamala's stance shifted again, her weight distribution changing in ways that suggested she was far from finished. "You want to test that theory?" The challenge hung in the air between them, and for the first time since this confrontation began, Dean felt a flicker of genuine fear. Not just fear of losing a fight, but fear of what that loss would mean for his reputation, his status, his carefully constructed identity as someone who was untouchable. "Cole," he said quietly, "when I say go, we both rush her at the same time." Cole nodded reluctantly, though every instinct was screaming at him to run. Kamala heard the whispered plan and felt the familiar calm that had always preceded her best martial arts performances. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "When you're outnumbered, make them come to you. Control the engagement." She was ready. "Go!" Dean shouted. He and Cole rushed forward simultaneously, their plan simple but effective: overwhelm her with numbers and force. Dean aimed high, going for her shoulders to bring her down, while Cole went low, trying to take out her legs. But Kamala had been preparing for exactly this scenario through months of training with her father. As they charged, she stepped back and pivoted left, using Dean's momentum to redirect him past her, while simultaneously bringing her knee up into Cole's solar plexus as he dove low. Cole crumpled, gasping for air, while Dean spun around in fury. "You little—" he started, but Kamala cut him off. "Is that all you've got?" she asked, her voice steady despite her elevated heart rate. 3 years of varsity football, and you can't handle one girl who's been in a wheelchair for 6 months? The taunt hit its mark. Dean's face flushed red with humiliation and rage. He looked around at his friends, Troy still on the ground holding his ribs. Cole doubled over trying to breathe, and realized that everything he thought he knew about power dynamics was crumbling around him. "You think you're so smart?" he snarled, circling her now like a predator looking for an opening. "You think your little martial arts moves make you tough?" "I think," Kamala replied, rotating to keep him in view, "that you've never faced someone who actually knows how to fight back." Dean feinted left, then came in fast from the right, swinging wildly. But his movements were driven by emotion rather than technique. Telegraphed and clumsy, Kamala ducked under his swing and drove her palm up into his nose, not hard enough to break it, but enough to bring tears to his eyes and make him stagger backward. "My turn," she said quietly. What followed was less a fight than a demonstration. Years of martial arts training, months of focused rehabilitation, and a lifetime of controlled anger came together in a series of movements that were as precise as they were devastating. Dean rushed her again, and this time Kamala didn't just evade. She met his charge head-on. She grabbed his outstretched arm, used his momentum to spin him around, and swept his legs out from under him. He hit the asphalt hard, the impact jarring through his entire body. Troy had managed to get back to his feet and made another attempt to help his friend, but Kamala was ready for him too. As he approached from behind, she pivoted and caught him with a controlled strike to his shoulder that sent him spinning sideways and back to the ground. "Stop!" Cole gasped from where he was still trying to catch his breath. "Just stop!" But Dean wasn't finished. Pride and humiliation drove him to his feet one more time, blood trickling from his nose, his Letterman jacket torn and dirty. "This isn't over!" he wheezed, wiping blood from his face. "You think you've won something? You think this changes anything?" "Actually," Kamala said, not even breathing hard, "I think it changes everything." Dean looked around at the scene, his 2 friends on the ground, his own disheveled appearance, and Kamala standing calmly in the center of it all, completely in control. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They hadn't just lost a fight, they'd been dominated, humiliated, reduced to exactly the kind of helpless victims they'd tried to make her. "You were recording this, weren't you?" he suddenly demanded, whirling to face Zara. Zara held up her phone, her face pale but determined. "Every second of it. Delete it right now. Number. Delete it, or I'll—" "You'll what?" Kamala stepped between Dean and Zara, her stance making it clear that any threat to her friend would have to go through her first. "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough for one day?" Dean's hands clenched into fists, his face a mask of frustrated rage. But as he looked at Kamala, standing tall, unafraid, clearly capable of defending herself and others, something fundamental shifted in his expression. The easy confidence that had carried him through years of unopposed bullying was gone, replaced by the dawning realization that his victims might not always stay victims. That's when the voice cut across the parking lot. "What's going on out here?" Miss Reynolds emerged from the school building, drawn by the sounds of the confrontation. She took in the scene with the trained eye of an educator who'd witnessed countless teenage conflicts, Three boys in various states of dishevelment, one girl standing calmly beside an overturned wheelchair, and another girl holding a phone. "Everything's fine, miss." "Reynolds," Dean said quickly, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "Just a misunderstanding." But Miss Reynolds wasn't buying it. She'd seen Dean's bloody nose, Troy's pained expression as he held his ribs, Cole's labored breathing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the aftermath of a fight. "Miss Walker," she said, addressing Kamala directly. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Kamala replied calmly. "Better than fine, actually." "Miss," Reynolds noticed something that made her do a double take. "You're standing." "Yes, ma'am. I've been working on my recovery." The teacher's gaze moved to the three boys, then to Zara's phone, then back to Kamala. The pieces were falling into place, and she didn't like the picture they formed. "Miss Mitchell," she said to Zara, "I trust you have documentation of whatever happened here." Zara nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. Everything." Dean's face went white as he realized the implications. Video evidence of three boys attacking a disabled girl, even one who could defend herself, wasn't going to be explained away as a misunderstanding. "All of you," Miss Reynolds said with quiet authority, "are coming with me to the office." Now, as they made their way back toward the school building, Kamala walking steadily beside her retrieved wheelchair, the three boys trailing behind like defeated soldiers, Dean finally understood that this wasn't just about losing a fight. He'd lost everything. The walk back to the school building felt surreal to Kamala. Her adrenaline was still coursing through her system, her hands trembling slightly from the confrontation, but her steps were steady and sure. Behind her, Dean nursed his bloody nose, while Troy and Cole limped along in defeated silence. Miss Reynolds led them directly to the main office, where the evening custodial staff looked up in surprise at the unusual procession. The fluorescent lights seemed harsh after the dim parking lot, casting everything in stark relief. "Mrs. Patterson," Miss Reynolds called to the secretary, who was preparing to leave for the day. "I need you to contact Principal Harris immediately, and will need to reach the parents of these 4 students." Vice Principal Jameson emerged from his office, having heard the commotion. His expression immediately shifted to one of controlled annoyance when he saw the group. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone suggesting this was an unwelcome interruption to his evening routine. "There was an altercation in the parking lot," Miss Reynolds replied. "Miss Mitchell has it recorded." Jameson's eyes flicked to Zara's phone, and Kamala caught a flash of concern cross his features. "I'm sure it's just another misunderstanding. You know how these things can get blown out of proportion." "Show him," Miss Reynolds said to Zara. As the video played, Jameson's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. Kamala watched him carefully, noting how he winced when Dean yanked her from the wheelchair, how his jaw tightened when the boys advanced on her. "Well," Jameson said when it ended, his voice carefully neutral, "this is certainly unfortunate, but it looks like Miss Walker handled herself quite well. No real harm done." "No real harm done?" Miss Reynolds's voice rose with disbelief. "They assaulted her." Now let's not be dramatic. These are good kids who got carried away. I'm sure we can handle this with a simple disciplinary meeting." The office door burst open, and Principal Harris strode in, his expression already grim from Miss Reynolds's urgent phone call. He was a tall, thin man who'd been principal for 15 years and prided himself on knowing everything that happened in his school. "Where's this video I need to see?" he demanded without preamble. Jameson stepped forward quickly. "Principal Harris, I think we can handle this situation without—" "Show me the video." Harris cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. As Harris watched the footage, his expression grew darker with each passing second. When Dean yanked Kamala from her wheelchair, Harris's hands clenched into fists. When the boys taunted her about faking her disability, his face flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable," he said when it ended. "Completely unacceptable." "Sir," Jameson interjected, "I think if we look at this objectively, it's really just a case of teenage emotions getting out of hand. These boys have excellent records." "Excellent records?" Harris turned to his vice principal with barely controlled fury. "Mr. Jameson, are you telling me this is the first time you've dealt with complaints about these students harassing Miss Walker?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jameson's face went pale as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "Well, there have been some minor incidents, but nothing that rose to the level of minor incidents." Kamala spoke for the first time since entering the office. "I reported them stealing my wheelchair months ago. You told me it was just boys being boys." Harris's attention snapped to Kamala, then back to Jameson. "You've been covering this up." "I wasn't covering anything up," Jameson said defensively. "I was handling typical teenage conflicts through appropriate channels. By ignoring them," Miss Reynolds added. "I tried to file a report about harassment I witnessed in my classroom. You discouraged me from documenting it." Harris looked like he was having trouble processing what he was hearing. "How long has this been going on?" "Months," Kamala said quietly. "Since I started here. And it's been escalating because they knew nothing would happen to them." 20 minutes later, parents began arriving. Kamala's mother and father came first, Nora's professional composure cracking when she saw her daughter's torn jacket and scraped palms. "Are you hurt?" she asked, immediately checking Kamala for injuries. "I'm okay, Mom." "Really?" Mark stood behind them, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. His daughter standing tall and uninjured, 3 boys looking defeated, and 2 administrators clearly in conflict. "Mr. Walker," Principal Harris said carefully, "I want to assure you that we're taking this situation very seriously. I'm also learning that there may have been systemic failures in how previous complaints were handled." Jameson shifted uncomfortably as Dean's parents arrived. His father, a large man in an expensive suit, immediately began demanding explanations. "This is clearly a case of self-defense," Dean's father declared loudly. "My son was attacked." "Mr. Riley," Harris interrupted, "I suggest you watch this video before you say another word." As the parents watched the footage, the room's atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Dean's mother gasped. Troy's father cursed under his breath. Cole's mother stared in horrified disbelief. "This is assault," Harris said when it ended. "Against a student my administration apparently failed to protect." Jameson tried one last deflection. "Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves. These are good kids who made a mistake." "Stop talking," Harris commanded, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "You're done handling this situation. You're done handling any situation involving student safety." The weight of those words settled over everyone present. Jameson's face went white as he realized his career was effectively over. "This matter will be referred to the school board immediately," Harris continued, "and we'll be contacting the police. Miss Walker, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express." Kamala nodded, feeling a strange sense of vindication as she watched the system that had failed her finally acknowledge its mistakes. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. 3 weeks later, Kamala walked through the hallways of Clearwater High School with a confidence that radiated from every step. She still used her wheelchair when she needed it for longer distances or when fatigue set in. But the choice was hers now, not dictated by limitation or fear. The transformation had been remarkable. The video had gone viral within hours, bringing national attention to the school's handling of disability harassment. Justice for Kamala had trended for days, sparking conversations about bullying, disability rights, and institutional accountability across the country. The new anti-harassment policy passed unanimously last night, Zara said as they met at Kamala's locker. My mom said the school board meeting was packed. Good, Kamala replied, pulling out her chemistry textbook. Maybe some real changes will finally stick. The aftermath had been swift and comprehensive. Dean, Troy, and Cole had been expelled and faced assault charges that would follow them to any school they tried to attend. Vice Principal Jameson had been terminated immediately, his 20-year career ending in disgrace. Principal Harris had implemented sweeping policy changes and hired an outside consultant to review the school's entire approach to student safety. How does it feel? Zara asked as they walked toward class. How does what feel? Being the girl who changed everything. Leo. Kamala considered the question. Around them, students moved through the hallways with a different energy than before. There was more awareness, more respect, more understanding that actions had consequences. Teachers were more vigilant, administrators more responsive, and students more willing to speak up when they witnessed harassment. It feels like I can finally breathe, she said. Miss Reynolds had been promoted to vice principal, her first act being the establishment of a student advocacy program. She waved at them from her new office, a genuine smile lighting up her face. Miss Walker, she called out. The reporter from Channel 7 confirmed your interview for this afternoon. Are you ready? Kamala nodded. She'd become something of a reluctant spokesperson for disability rights, fielding interview requests from across the country. The attention was overwhelming sometimes, but she understood the importance of her story, reaching other students who might be suffering in silence. During lunch, Kamala sat with a group that had grown considerably over the past few weeks. Students who had previously been afraid to associate with her now sought out her friendship, drawn by her strength and authenticity. But it was the letter in her backpack that meant the most to her. Read it again, Zara urged. Kamala pulled out the handwritten note from a middle school student in Texas whose video message had gone viral in response to hers. The girl had been facing similar harassment and had used Kamala's story as inspiration to speak up to her own administration. Dear Kamala, she read aloud, because of you, I found my voice. Because of you, I'm not hiding anymore. Because of you, 3 bullies at my school are facing consequences for the first time. Thank you for showing me that we don't have to stay victims. We can become warriors. That's the 15th letter this week, Zara observed. I know, it's incredible. After school, Kamala found her parents waiting in the parking lot, the same parking lot where everything had changed 3 weeks ago. But instead of being a place of trauma, it had become a symbol of her transformation. How was the interview? Mark asked as she approached. Good. The reporter asked tough questions, but fair ones. Any word on the college scouts? Nora inquired. Kamala's newfound fame had attracted attention from adaptive sports programs across the country. 3 universities had already reached out about martial arts scholarships, recognizing not just her physical abilities, but her character and determination. Virginia Tech called this morning, Kamala said with a smile. They want to fly me out for a campus visit. As they drove home, Kamala reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she'd been broken. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. The accident had taken so much from her, and the bullying had threatened to take even more. But sitting here now, stronger than she'd ever been, surrounded by family who loved her and friends who respected her, she realized something profound. She hadn't just survived her challenges, she'd transformed them into purpose. You know, she said as they pulled into their driveway. "I used to think the accident was the worst thing that ever happened to me." "And now?" Mark asked. "Now, I think it was the thing that showed me who I really am. That even in the darkest moments, I'm stronger than I ever believed. That even broken, I could fight back and win." That evening, as Kamala worked through her physical therapy routine in the garage, she caught sight of herself in the mirror. She saw someone who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Someone who had turned victimhood into advocacy, pain into purpose, silence into strength. She was Kamala Walker. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a voice for those who couldn't yet find their own. And she was exactly where she belonged, standing tall, speaking truth, and proving that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is simply refusing to be broken by it. The girl who had once been defined by her wheelchair now defined herself by her unbreakable spirit. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day. Snow fell lightly across Clearwater, coating the school grounds in a delicate white that seemed to cleanse the scars of autumn. The parking lot where everything had changed just weeks ago now looked almost unrecognizable, softened by winter's hand, as if the pavement itself wanted to forget the echoes of humiliation and rage. Kamala Walker paused at the edge of the lot, her breath misting in the cold air. She could still see it all if she let herself, the laughter, the phone cameras, the feel of asphalt against her cheek. But today the memory carried no sting, only a quiet reminder of how far she had come. She adjusted the strap of her backpack and continued toward the main entrance. Students moved aside with respectful nods now, not the mocking stares or whispered commentary that had once trailed her. The hallways felt different too, livelier, yes, but also heavier with awareness. It wasn't fear, at least, not the same fear Dean Riley and his friends had inspired. It was respect. The story had spread beyond Clearwater faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours of Zara posting the video, hashtags had ignited across social media. By morning, Kamala's name was trending nationwide. News anchors debated the failures of the school system. Activists pointed to her resilience as proof of what students with disabilities endured daily. For the first time, Kamala wasn't just a girl in a wheelchair. She was a symbol. Symbols, though, came with weight. "Kamala!" Zara jogged up beside her now, cheeks flushed from the cold, her ever-present backpack bouncing at her side. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Kamala replied. Though her hands betrayed a tremor, she quickly shoved into her pockets. The auditorium had been transformed for the afternoon's assembly. Reporters filled the first 2 rows, their cameras balanced on tripods like silent sentinels. Behind them, parents, teachers, and students gathered in expectant silence. At the center of the stage, a simple podium stood, flanked by banners declaring Clearwater's new anti-harassment initiative. Principal Harris opened with firm words about accountability and change. Miss Reynolds, promoted now to vice principal, spoke about vigilance and courage, her gaze sweeping the room like a shield. But it was Kamala they had all come to hear. When her name was called, the applause was thunderous. She walked to the podium without her wheelchair, though it waited discreetly just off stage, should she need it. Each step felt both fragile and monumental, the sound of her shoes on the wood floor like punctuation marks in a story that was still being written. She gripped the podium, steadying herself. The crowd hushed. "I'm not here to talk about what happened to me," she began, her voice clear though her heart hammered. "You've all seen the video. You've read the headlines. You know the facts. What I want to talk about is what happens next." She let the words hang, scanning the sea of faces. Some avoided her gaze, guilty with the knowledge that they had once laughed along. Others looked at her with awe, the kind that made her feel almost untouchable. Neither reaction was the truth she wanted. Bullies don't just appear out of nowhere, she continued. They thrive in silence, in the moments when we look away because it's easier, in the times when we convince ourselves that what we're seeing isn't our problem. For months, I thought silence was strength, that if I just endured, things would change. But silence isn't strength. It's permission. Her voice steadied further, fueled by memory and resolve. What happened in that parking lot wasn't just about me. It was about every student who's been mocked for the way they walk, the way they speak, the way they live. It was about a system that ignored warning signs until it was almost too late. And it was about the choice we all have every day to speak or to stay silent. For the first time since she began, she allowed herself a small smile. My father once told me that the biggest mistake bullies make is believing their victims will stay victims forever. I believed that too, once. But I was wrong. We don't stay victims. We adapt, we endure, and eventually we rise. The auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite applause this time, but a wave of sound, cathartic and fierce, the kind that seemed to shake the very walls. Kamala stepped back, breathing hard, and saw Zara grinning at her from the wings, phone in hand. Another video, no doubt. Another story about to spread. Later, as the building emptied and dusk settled over the snow-covered campus, Kamala lingered by her locker. Zara joined her, looping an arm through hers. "You were amazing," Zara said simply. "Thanks," Kamala murmured, though her thoughts were far away. "You okay?" Kamala closed her locker, the metallic clang echoing. "Yeah. Just realizing this isn't over. Not for me. Not for anyone else like me. That speech, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I too, I too, I too, I. They walked out together, the last two students in the building. The parking lot stretched before them, the same one that had been a battleground, a humiliation, a proving ground. Tonight, under the glow of lamplight and the hush of falling snow, it felt transformed. Not a place of fear, but a place of rebirth. Her parents' car waited by the curb. Mark leaned against the hood, arms folded, pride and worry etched equally into his face. Nora stood beside him, her hand raised in greeting, eyes shining. Kamala felt warmth surge through her chest. For all the headlines, the policies, the speeches, it was this that mattered most. The people who had stood with her when the world seemed determined to knock her down. As she approached, her phone buzzed. Another notification, another message from a stranger somewhere across the country. She opened it, reading quickly. It was from a boy in Ohio who'd written, "Because of you, I spoke up. Because of you, they finally listened." Kamala slipped the phone back into her pocket. The snow crunched beneath her shoes as she reached her parents. She wasn't broken. She wasn't finished. She was just beginning. And somewhere deep inside, she knew her story would not be the last. The corridors of Clearwater High now carry a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of whispered cruelties or hidden laughter, but the steady hush that follows transformation. When people realize the world has shifted under their feet and that things will never be the same again. Kamala's story did not end in the parking lot, nor in the principal's office, nor even when the policies were rewritten and the guilty were held accountable. Her story continues every time a student wheels themselves into class without fear of being mocked. It continues in every teacher who chooses to speak up instead of looking away, and in every bystander who decides that silence is no longer an option. Because that is the truest lesson here. Silence protects the bully, not the victim. For too long, Kamala believed that endurance alone was strength. She thought that if she swallowed her anger, if she endured one more cruel comment, one more calculated shove, one more humiliation, eventually it would stop. But endurance without resistance is permission, and permission allows cruelty to grow. What broke that cycle was not just her fists, her training, or her defiance in the parking lot. It was her decision to say "no more" out loud, in front of everyone, to refuse to let their lies, their intimidation, and even the system's indifference define her reality. Strength, she discovered, is not measured only in how hard you can strike back, but in how bravely you choose to stand up, even when standing itself feels impossible. And isn't that the lesson for all of us? That whether we walk, or wheel, or stumble our way through life, each of us holds the power to turn silence into voice, fear into defiance, pain into purpose. The boys who mocked her thought they understood power. They believed it lived in numbers, in privilege, in unchecked arrogance. But real power is quieter. It lives in resilience, in the ability to rise after you've been knocked down, in the choice to fight not only for yourself but for everyone who cannot yet fight. Kamala became more than a survivor that day. She became a mirror held up to a community, forcing everyone, from classmates to administrators to parents, to ask themselves the question we all must answer. When cruelty stands before us, will we look away or will we act? Perhaps you've seen shadows of this story in your own life. Maybe in a classroom where the quiet kid is pushed too far. Maybe in an office where someone different is made the butt of jokes. Maybe even in your own home, where silence feels easier than confrontation. But Kamala's journey reminds us, every act of silence feeds the bully. Every act of courage starves them. And courage is contagious. That is why her story matters, not just because she won, but because she showed that winning is possible, that systems can change when enough voices demand it, that bullies are not invincible, that even the smallest act of resistance, one voice, one no, one person choosing to film instead of turning away, can ignite a transformation that spreads far beyond a single hallway or parking lot. So ask yourself, where in your own world do you see the shadows of Clearwater? Where are the hallways that echo with laughter that cuts, the spaces where silence has become permission? And more importantly, what role will you choose to play? At Raw Black Stories, we tell these stories not just to entertain, but to remind ourselves of what is possible when courage meets compassion. If this story moved you, if it stirred something inside you, then don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice may be the one someone else needs to hear. Join this community by subscribing, not for numbers or clicks, but because together we carry these lessons forward. Together, we remind each other never to let cruelty stand unchallenged. Kamala's fight was not just hers. It belongs to all of us. To every student who has ever been cornered. To every worker who has ever been belittled. To every person who has been told they are less than human. The story ends where action begins. With you, with me, with us. And as you close this chapter, remember, strength is not found in silence. It is found in the voice that refuses to be quiet, in the step that refuses to stop, in the spirit that refuses to break. Because victims don't stay victims forever. Sometimes they become warriors, and sometimes they change the world.